Harlech Castle has been besieged 5 times during its long history. This video looks at 2 of those sieges. They were notable as Harlech really was the last stand castle during 2 epic wars. And one of those sieges was also the longest of any castle in Wales and England. Harlech was built by King Edward I in the late 1200s. It was one of a chain of castles built to keep Wales suppressed. Just a few years after it was built, Harlech was besieged during the revolt of Madog ap Llywelyn. Later it became the base for Owain Glyndŵr. He was besieged there, but managed to slip away.
During 2 mighty conflicts, Harlech Castle was the last outpost of warring sides. It held out when every other castle in Wales and England had fallen. This happened during the Wars of the Roses of the 1460s and happened again during the Civil War of the 1640s.
Reasons for this include its location, considered more remote than most, and it's perched high on a rocky outcrop facing the sea with mountainous and rugged Snowdonia to the rear. And although it's quite small, it is cleverly designed and was very formidable. During the 3 decades of the Wars of the Roses, the fortunes of the Yorkist and Lancastrian opponents ebbed and flowed. In 1460, the Yorkists were on top. After they captured King Henry VI, his wife, Margaret of Anjou, fled west with her infant son, Prince Edward, and briefly sought refuge at Harlech. Not long after, the Yorkist King Edward IV was determined to wipe out resistance in Wales. He appointed Lord William Herbert, the Earl of Pembroke, to lead an army to crush remaining Lancastrian opponents. He was successful. One by one, the Welsh castles fell, until only Harlech stood defiant. Seizing the castle was a very tough challenge. Its walls towered high, and it could be supplied by sea, which at that time lapped at its base, unlike today. It was easier to try to hem in the garrison than mount an all-out attack.
So it would seem that in the main the siege was more of a waiting game rather than there being regular attacks on the castle and attempts to take it by force. The castle's commander was an experienced soldier, Dafydd ap Ivan ap Einon, and from 1461 to 1468 those within these walls held out for King Henry VI. The Yorkists tried to get the garrison to surrender by offering a pardon, the alternative being severe punishment, but to no avail. Then 3 years passed and the castle was being used for raids on the surrounding countryside. It was decided that enough was enough. A deadline was given for surrender, but it came and went. There was no surrender.
Then, in 1468, Jasper Tudor, uncle of the future King Henry VII, landed by sea at Harlech and raided the town of Denbigh. This seems to have been a final straw for King Edward. He demanded that the castle be taken. Lord Herbert brought a force of up to 10,000 men to blockade the castle very tightly. And once again, terms for surrender were offered and refused. But then, after a month, perhaps with supplies critically short, a surrender was finally agreed. Most of the men in the garrison were pardoned and just went home. Their leader, Dafydd, marched away with his men and then disappears from history.
And with Harlech taken, all of Wales and England was under Yorkist control. The Wars of the Roses seemed to be over. But, of course, within a few years, it was all to erupt once again.
And this 7 years of defiance, the longest siege of any mainland castle in British history, is said to have inspired that rousing song, Men of Harlech. Nearly 2 centuries later, history, in one way, was to repeat itself. During the civil war that broke out in 1642, Wales had initially been a stronghold of King Charles I, but within a few years the forces of Parliament began to get the upper hand. Parliamentary commander Major General Thomas Mitton besieged and took a number of castles. In 1646 the Civil War seemed just about over. Parliament was victorious, but one place still held out for the king. Yes, Harlech. Royalist General Prince Rupert had made Colonel William Owen the constable in charge. He was the brother of Sir John Owen of Conwy, which Mitton had taken after a siege. William Owen had repaired the fortifications of Harlech, which had fallen into disrepair. Mitton came and took the town of Harlech, but the sturdy little castle held out. It could be defended by very few men, with at that time a garrison of only 28, according to one account. They held out from June 1646 until March 1647, 9 months. But finally, the exhausted men surrendered.
The terms of the surrender were honourable. That meant that the garrison could march out, swear an oath not to rebel again, and simply go home. Colonel Owen, though, as a substantial landowner, was fined a large sum. He went abroad for a short while, but returned in 1648 and joined the rebellion against Parliament that had begun in Pembrokeshire.
On the orders of Parliament, the castle was to be slighted, that is, damaged so much that it could not be used in any future rebellion by royalists. Parts of the structure were dismantled, but it seems to have been a half-hearted job. There was far less damage here than had been inflicted on many castles elsewhere. And today, Harlech Castle continues to tower over the surrounding area. It's a key part of a dramatic landscape that has attracted artists, famous and otherwise. It is now classified as a World Heritage Site and, along with the Welsh castles of Beaumaris, Conwy and Caernarfon, is regarded as one of the finest examples of military architecture from its time.